I've wanted to return to this game for a good while, and the main reason why I hadn't is because I'm not really sure where to start. There's a lot to say about it. Additionally, this Brazilian Mega Drive interpretation of the popular 90s shooter Duke Nukem 3D holds a special place in my heart. It's the first game I ever bought online, first import, and it's also the first game I ever properly reviewed back in 2012. How exactly I found out about this game isn't clear to me, but my guess is it floated around the recommended section of dope ROMs back when I was finding more Sega Genesis games to emulate on my PSP. I had played the original game before at a friend's house, but otherwise Duke Nukem was a foreign series to me. This Mega Drive game would end up being my first one-on-one experience with the Duke, and upon starting the game things quickly entered weird territory. Have you ever played a mod that imports assets from another game to make it seem like it's official, but feels off because it's not quite the same? Yeah, something like that. Years later, once people became more aware of the game, it would often be considered a bootleg, and I ran with that too, for a while. Only in more recent years, the people involved in this game were interviewed to speak about their operations over in Brazil, revealing a lot more about this bizarre game. First and foremost, why does it exist? This release came out in 1998, which was past the console's lifespan and official release on the at-the-time current-gen Sega Saturn. Truth is, Sega consoles were very popular in Brazil. What was our NES was their master system. That level of popularity did transfer over into the Mega Drive generation, although with somewhat less of an impact. And now, allow me to introduce Tectoy, the developers of this Mega Drive game and major distributors of Sega-related products in Brazil. The popularity of the Mega Drive market, along with Sega's good relations with Tectoy, allowed them to continue producing games for this and the previous gen beyond the intended lifespan. Still, I can't imagine what made them think bringing Duke Nukem 3D over would be worth the effort. There were complications beyond the daunting task of bringing this advanced game to aging hardware. 3D Realms, the development team behind the original, had once publicly stated that this effort was never authorized by them. This led people to believe that Tectoy's release of the game was never legally licensed. However, the developers would eventually say in their interview that they did get licensing from the game's publisher, GT Interactive. Since that information went public, Piko Interactive was said to have helped in settling this matter. They then purchased the rights to this release, which resulted in a Piko Interactive re-release in 2015, finally made available for audiences worldwide. This release included a crosshair and some improved scrolling. I've never played this one, no ROM dump seems to exist yet, and you can no longer purchase it on the Piko Interactive website. It may have been removed due to the eventual discovery of Tectoy's licensing the game possibly being an internal misunderstanding all along. So this brings us back to square one with the question of whether or not this game was ever actually licensed. And if it was, then maybe Gearbox, current owners of the Duke Nukem IP, had a say in preventing further distribution of this game. Another interesting piece of internet history regarding the game is the speculation of what engine it uses. For years, people assumed it was the same one used for Zero Tolerance, another FPS game developed for this hardware. From what I can tell, this speculation came largely due to the presence of elevators, which were used for the loading of other environments between play. According to Tectoy, however, the engine was created entirely in-house by Mauricio Guerra, Daniel Trevisan, and Heriberto Manrique. Interestingly, the game's own credits list the build engine, which I assume is there because they thought they had to mention it in association with the game, because there's no way that's being used here. You've probably noticed from the footage that this game doesn't actually seem to run that well, which is true. It's the specifications here that make it noteworthy, because this speed matched with the resolution on Mega Drive hardware is very impressive. Thankfully, despite the low frame rate, it is still very playable in the released state, and it probably couldn't be much better than it was then anyways. I would like to thank an Alan Douglas for helping me to translate the Portuguese interview with Tectoy. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to provide most of this information. So here we have an authentic copy of the game. I've always felt this game was a significant piece of my journey in molding who I am today, so having a physical copy was important to me. Even though the box and manual are in Portuguese, the game itself is entirely in English. Keep in mind, not all PAL region games will work on an NTSC Genesis, but thankfully this one isn't locked, so let's pop her in. Here is Duke Nukem 3D's Mega Drive interpretation by Tectoy. Note how I haven't yet called the game a port, and that's because in every way besides the assets and title, it isn't. The original levels surely wouldn't fit the limited memory, so the decision was made to have Daniel Trevisan create new maps from scratch. They are unique stages with only vague similarities at best. To me, that's enough to consider this an interpretation of Duke Nukem 3D more than a port. But in particular, this would be called an interpretation of only the second chapter, Lunar Apocalypse. Now, one thing you need to know is that the familiar tone of Duke Nukem is inexistent here. A lot of that in the original was reflected by his one-liners, of which there are only a handful of. You won't come across them in traditional gameplay either, they're exclusive to the menus.
Let's rock.
A lot of the adult content is also absent, such as strippers, steroids, humor. It's more like a traditional corridor shoot fest. I've seen a lot of people compare the game to Wolfenstein 3D, and yeah, I can see where they're coming from. The game starts with this hilariously compressed version of the grab bag theme. Developer Heriberto Manrique was responsible for porting the music in this game, which was done by converting the original game's MIDI files into something the Mega Drive could handle. Isn't that something? That being said, the music you hear in the game is all processed from the PC MIDIs. So there's no originality in that aspect other than getting it to work alongside the other sound effects that were going on. Apparently getting multiple sounds to overlap in this game was challenging, which isn't hard for me to believe knowing the game uses actual audio samples from the original. An important sound from the original games would be the chirp of sentry drones when they make sight of you. Unfortunately, you won't hear that in this Mega Drive version, so expect to randomly blow up on occasion when one makes contact with you. Also, they do an absurd amount of damage. Also, the first one you come across is just to the right of this door here. Most people who've played Mega Drive's Duke Nukem 3D will tell you they've been hit by that thing once and never touched the game again because what the actual hell was that thing doing there? This won't be the last of the game's sadistic enemy placements. Dear God, there is a lot of that. See this menu? See the word load? That's very important. This game uses a save system that's basically the equivalent of using save states. You are going to quickly get into the habit of saving every time you're about to leave an area. It's necessary unless you have the game memorized. Before we go any further, I might as well explain the controls here. These are the 3 and 6 button Sega Genesis controllers. You can play with either of these, although I actually purchased my 6 button controller for use with this game specifically. With the 3 button controller, you're going to be using combination inputs like holding the start button to do basic things like change weapons. Pressing A opens doors, flips switches, and activates keycards. Much like the original game, you don't need to select the keycards in your inventory to use them. That being said, inventory items can't be selected at all here. They do exist, but instead of manually activating, the game will do so automatically once they're necessary for progression. Holding B lets you strafe in conjunction with the D-pad. Pressing C fires the active weapon. Pressing X swaps from running speed to walking speed, which I think is an unnecessary waste of a button in this very limited setup. Pressing Y activates the on-screen map, which really chugs this game. I've played through this one a number of times, so I don't need it anymore, but I suppose it's useful for a first-time player. Pressing Z switches to the next weapon. Unfortunately, you can't go backwards in that list, only forwards. So it's a bit monotonous mid-battle when you have to switch out to a less powerful weapon, especially since the last 3 of them are explosives and will seriously hurt the player if fired at close range. An observant player may quickly notice the game's lack of ceiling and floor textures. Instead, they use solid colors, usually different shades of gray. The walls are textured and quite detailed, which takes the attention away from the ceilings and floors. It all ends up looking quite good, even at a distance. It can be rather unstable at times and on occasion will even speed up dramatically, so I guess the game has no maximum frame rate cap. You know how that in-game map will drop the frame rate? Well, you can do the same thing during the game's demo that plays after the title screen with this pop-up menu. This can put the demo out of sync, and I managed to get footage of the player blowing themselves up, which just resets the game. Earlier I said the sentry drones do an absurd amount of damage. They're the most notably overpowered enemies, with one exception later on, but this flaw does carry into the rest of the cast. The assault troopers, who wear blue suits of armor instead of light green now, will shoot laser blasts at the player in spurts. Much like the frame rate, there seems to be no cap on this. The pattern at which they shoot is also very unpredictable. Sometimes they'll shoot countless blasts, and other times just one before they start walking around again. Could never find a rhythm to it. The best you can do is aim, shoot, and hope for the best. Seriously, not having a crosshair is a sin. Did I mention I'm playing this on the easiest of 3 difficulties? If you haven't given up on the game yet, then blow up these gas canisters to reveal a hallway that closes in on itself and will most likely kill you. Duke's Mega Drive interpretation may have the worst introduction I've ever seen in a video game, because within a minute there are already multiple death traps. This isn't supposed to be a rage game, but it sure feels like one. Or at least that's how the first stage plays out, where you only have your pistol and mighty foot. Head over this way and flip the switch. Behind this door is another assault trooper. Kill and move past it to find shotgun ammunition. So, I guess the game is hinting to me that there's a shotgun nearby, and that's decent level design. Press the A button on whatever this graffiti is supposed to represent to find some protozoid slimers. You can easily take these guys out with your pistol or mighty foot. Also, there's your secret shotgun. I really have no idea where these guys just came from, but they're here now, so thank goodness I turned around quickly because that sentry droid was about to mark the end of me. Another nearby switch will open a door with protozoid slimers that are about to hatch from their eggs. Behind all those is a blue keycard. I used this to open the next area, which had another assault trooper behind it. Killed the guy, and what do you know, he dropped some ammunition. This is an uncommon occurrence in the game, where enemies can drop ammo or armor pickups for the player to collect. Move forward to activate this door, which is actually an elevator. This is the only elevator in the game that looks like this. The others tend to, resemble elevators. I'm not sure why this level was designed so poorly, but my guess is that this also happened to be the first level Daniel Trevisan designed. Rough drafts probably doubled as final drafts in this game's production. Up this elevator is a switch puzzle, not unlike those you'd find in the original. Play around with them a bit to see what works, because one of them opens a door with a switch inside, which opens the other door perpendicular to it. Up here is one of the first of many different wall posters, this one being an anarchy symbol. There's a good variety of these in the game, thrown up pretty randomly without any relation to the environment other than to make it pop out a bit more. Honestly, pretty good stuff. I'm glad they used these because it keeps the game from looking as samey, boring, and grey as it usually does. Further into the level you collect some protective boots, which will be activated as soon as you enter this hazardous zone through a teleporter. The game only has these areas a handful of times, and thankfully there's not usually much in these places, so you don't have to worry about your health too much. Exactly as it should be. Further yet, you'll be exposed to space, although you don't need any protective gear for this area, so I guess there's transparent glass or something? Anyways, there's this door that just barely opens, making a yellow keycard visible. You need this to complete the level, so now you have to find your way over there somehow. Not a problem, just head left and follow the path. This is a great way of introducing the player to the sort of level design this game will occasionally tease you with. It only gets more cryptic from here, which can be a bit confusing, but given these maps are never very big and the areas are distinct enough, I can't imagine any players struggling for more than a few minutes. The level ends with another switch puzzle, solved with the same pattern as the last. Then you find the auto-destruct button, which can be triggered to proceed with the next level. Spaceport completed. Now, that name may sound familiar to you. This game uses numerous titles from the original second chapter. There's supposed to be 11 stages, including the secrets, but in this game there's just 9. No secret stages either.
Let's rock.
On to the second stage, called the Incubator. First room grants you an atomic health, which is a 50 health pickup. You can overcharge your health with one of these if you have more than 50 points left. The potential of this pickup allows the player to cap up to a maximum of 200 health points. You'll also pick up the chain gun cannon in here, and you'll need it. Much like your own, the Pig Cop's shotguns behave a bit like sniper rifles. Range is not a factor here. As a result, these guys are extremely dangerous, but then again, everything in this game is extremely dangerous. Oh, that's not the sound we've come to expect from a Pig Cop. Unlike in the original, where all enemies had their own unique sounds, the only uniqueness here would be the firing of their weapons. All death screams are just the assault troopers. In this level, you get the pipe bombs. It can be quite necessary to launch these around a corner to safely pass by an area. What's really impressive is how they have actual physics. You can throw one at a wall and it'll bounce off in the proper direction. Hearing that death scream after a successful throw is very satisfying. Here's the RPG, which the game puts less than a meter away from a wall that can be blown up. You're going to find a lot of this game's secrets will be discovered by shooting explosives at them. Sometimes they're more than just secrets, though. This one has a red keycard behind it, so it's completely necessary to get in there. This is the sort of pseudo-crypticness that's required to get players thinking further into the game. You see why I defend this one? Yeah, it's unpolished, but to say it's a terrible game is a bit mean to me. Clearly there was talent here. And even though the combat is rather jank, it's rewarding. Sometimes I feel like the brutal difficulty is a gift to this game because actually completing a level is a special sort of satisfaction. The best part is anyone can do it with a little patience and a lot of quick saving. Uh-oh, here's a cocooned babe, who is beyond saving, unfortunately. The best thing you can do is end their suffering. Or don't. Doesn't actually change anything. Just a case of morality, really. They're the same as any other interactable entity. This is the first we'll come across, but there are other variations like ruined spacesuits and that one secret Luke Skywalker from the original that gets pasted around. Here's the last weapon of the game, the Devastator. This fires 2 less powerful missiles than the RPG, but at a faster rate of fire. Do you find it a bit odd how every weapon is available by the second of 9 missions? That said, you do have the option to restart levels with your starters if you want to. There's no level select screen, which is a tad bizarre with this format in mind, but should you die and not reload a save, that removes your collected arsenal. It's the reason why you can find weapons you already have scattered throughout the game, just in case you've decided not to load the last save. You also have to do that if you end up overwriting a save at a crucial moment, because you can't load any previous saves, there's just one. Hopefully you never make that mistake. I have a couple times, and it's not fun. So here we come across the first part of the game that is genuinely confusing. You got a bunch of different paths to go down, which all sort of blends together. A few of these paths are just long corridors with the same texture on each wall. I feel they probably got lazy with this one because it might be the worst layout in the game. After completing this level, I had to put the game down a bit as I wanted to take a break. The first half of it is pretty good, but the second half is a bit of a chore.
Let's rock.
You needed any more proof that these guys suck? If you think my reaction time just sucks, well, you're welcome to that opinion, but I'd suggest you play the game first to understand what the movement is like. It's not the easiest to explain, and I'd guess it has to do with the frame rate. Moving around is not a smooth experience, which is something you'd have to adjust to. The jank makes it hard to quickly get out of a situation, even when a threat is totally visible. It's still playable like this, but in these cases it can be difficult to win regardless of how familiar you are with the game. Anyways, welcome to Stage 3, Secret Laser. Where's the secret laser? I don't know. Guess it's pretty well hidden because I didn't find any such thing. Anyways, here's one of the game's peculiarities. See these two identical looking gates next to each other? Well, this one doesn't blow up, so surely the other one doesn't either. Alright, so there are a number of inconsistencies like this in the game. There's a certain gray door that almost always reflects it being a secret, but then there's one time where it wasn't. And there are doors that are always unlocked except for in 1 or 2 cases where they're not. Better distinction here would be preferable. I give a bit of an exception for secret areas since unpredictability is key. Ammunition is easy to find for most weapons too, so wasting an explosive here or there is fine. As long as you can pick up the ammunition. This game's a little weird with that. You have to be standing pretty much pixel perfect in front of something to pick it up. Here's an image of the Battle Lord, or this might be some kind of transmission, but it's a stationary screen. You never actually encounter this guy in the game. Later on, you come across a wall with faces of the Cycloid Emperor on them for some reason. Another boss that isn't in the game. There is one boss from the original in here, but we'll save that for the end. These wall fans make for some great immersive detail and will actually be used for a gimmick in one of the last levels. They'll occasionally show these fans as broken with some nearby Protozoid Slimers, implying they bursted out of there. Now, these are ideas brought over from the original game, but you can't say that being on the Mega Drive this stuff was necessary, so you can't help but appreciate these little details. So to actually bring up the menu in order to save, you have to hold Start plus A, B, and C at the same time, regardless of what button controller you're using. Too bad holding Start plus A and B will pause the game. I don't even know why that's necessary since the menu pauses it regardless. Other various combinations are used for the 3-button controller, so if you don't press all 4 of these buttons at once, then you're probably going to activate some other function on accident. It's a mess. They could have substituted the run button for the menu, but I guess that wouldn't be helpful for players using the 3-button controllers. The real handicap is the fact that this game is being played on the Mega Drive in the first place, so maybe it's unrealistic to complain. Fire extinguishers bleed for some reason. Actually, everything in this game bleeds, even the pipes bleed. So this is how the following level starts. You think this game was ever playtested? Wow! That's a lewd. Prepare for the most overpowered enemy in the game, Octobrains. If you thought the sentry droids were sadistic, that's nothing. Anytime you're hit by one of these psychic projectiles, you're probably already dead. Doesn't seem to matter how much health you have because I've overcharged health and armor before and it still kills me. You can take them out with one blast of your RPG, which seems to be the case for all non-boss enemies. But nothing can distract from the fact that the damage these guys do is beyond ridiculous. So this is lunar space, and well, it's a frustrating stage. You're given a number of teleporter entrances outside in space that the player will have to navigate to and fro in order to unlock various areas between them. Oftentimes, there's no distinction on what buttons unlock what doors, so it can be confusing. I usually take longer on this stage than any other. I can't say it's not fun, but the space gimmick, it's not so good. What is the space gimmick? Well, this stage uses some elements from the beta of Duke Nukem 3D. In the original game, you were intended to head out into space scenarios with the use of a collectible spacesuit, but that ended up being cancelled. Didn't stop Tectoy from bringing it over here, but I doubt it works in the same way as was originally intended. Moving in space is generally the same as being inside, the only difference is the lack of gravity that causes Duke's movement to be somewhat unpredictable. Standing still isn't an option either because you'll always be moving at least slightly. In a game that's already not the easiest to control, this just sucks. In the original, you could use a jetpack to fly around the various stages, and I imagine that's probably how the spacesuit worked in their scrapped concept. But there's no vertical movement in the Mega Drive, so this wouldn't have been possible. You'll be restricted to the X-axis. The stage also features flame sprinklers, another scrapped entity that'll hurt you upon touching it. Wait for it to run out in order to pass through without taking damage. Later in the game, you'll even find electric strikes, which were also scrapped. Running into one of these will darken the screen for a moment and take away lots of health. Anyways, back out in space, chaos ensues as you run out of oxygen. True, spacesuits are plenty in this stage, but if you want to get max kills, you're gonna have to spend a while out there. There's also an assault commander, which fires rockets from its anus. To me, these guys count as mini-bosses as they're the only enemies in the game that'll take more than one rocket. Now, despite space having the title of space, you're limited in exploration range. Just past these teleporter rooms are invisible walls that prevent you from moving further. So you'll have minimal area to walk through when going from these invisible walls to the teleporters. Now get this, they actually had the audacity to put sentry drones behind most of them. Who on earth was sadistic enough to put those there? You're gonna have to lure them out if you want to save yourself. Yeesh. Imagine if the game had you open a door to an assault commander. That'd be quite unfair. Occupied Territory is the 5th stage. There are some unique environments here that you won't see anywhere else in the game, and even a part that gates off the area from outer space, allowing you to see Earth in the distance. Also, here's the last recurring enemy in the game, Enforcers. These are hit scanners, and yeah, they surely didn't need to add this mechanic to the game. Whenever one of these is around, do your best to dispose of them as quickly as possible because they bring with them a world of hurt. Oh, hold up, my cat is watching me play. I gotta get a picture of this. That's one for the scrapbooks right there.
What are you waiting for, Christmas?
So this is a turret, and I'm pretty sure it shows up earlier in the game, but I wasn't able to find my footage of that. Pretty insignificant anyways, they're just stationary targets that are more of a level hazard than an enemy type. They'll fire the same laser blasts as assault troopers, but at a predetermined rate. Using a pipe bomb against them is usually a smart choice. Well, it's not his best photo, I must admit.
Let's rock.
Level 6, Mortal Prison. Shortly into this level, you'll come across a laser field that you can't cross. Behind it's the end of the stage, and some enforcers shooting away at you. You can't be damaged on either side of it, but once you're in that room, or the laser field goes down, you'll be easy pickings. There's something to be said about creating this sense of anticipation for the player to finally reach a place that was teased to them a while ago. So whenever I play this level, I feel like getting to that final room is a noteworthy accomplishment. But it's more than the concept of a journey to me, because the actual stage is a bit of a mess, and I usually just want it to end. Feels like they took everything from the previous stages and just kinda meshed it all together to create a confusing romp around this environment, which an interior designer would have a hard time explaining. You could wager that it's in the title. I mean, they called it the Mortal Prison after all. Well, yeah, that would make sense, but it consists of mostly giant rooms or basic corridors. Not much of a containment area. I've always forgotten about this level each time I revisit the game. The only thing I remember is that, oh yeah, it's that one with all those assault commanders. I can't say I didn't enjoy the level because there's a lot of combat, and that's always fun, but I just can't give much credit to the level design here. The 7th stage, however, Fatal Wind, is probably one of the best on offer. This one's got a ton of enemies, a level format that more closely resembles the original games, and unique ideas such as that earlier mentioned fan system. It isn't void of the usual nonsense, though. What follows, Electric Station, is something. The environment is varied and by all means interesting, however it's a bit too long, which may be the reason why the enemy count here is a bit lacking, so as to not wildly affect the game's performance. I found most of the time playing this level was just wandering around, instead of enjoying some much appreciated alien scum blasting. Electric Station shares many of the issues the Incubator's second half had. It tries to be distinct with different wall patterns, but the similar layout unfortunately doesn't balance this effort. It still becomes easy to get lost here. Once you've collected the necessary items, a lot of these areas become pointless, so you'll end up doing a lot of wasted backtracking. Enemy corpses do stick around, but a lot of these areas begin without much activity, so there's nothing to make you aware of previous engagements. The most confusing part of this level would have to be this particular electric strike that guards your only path to the exit. Taking damage here is, as far as I know, a mandatory part of completing the level. These things tend to pop in and out of existence, but this one never does. This might have been put here by mistake, although the dramatically slow opening door almost implies to me that there's some kind of solution. Honestly not sure, and the only other playthroughs I've found online just take the hit here. While my opinion of this stage is a bit rocky, there is this one awesome area where it's implied to have the player use a teleporter in order to flank this assault commander. I really enjoyed this bit, and it makes me long for an experience that had more of this ingenious level design. But I guess for that, you'd be better off playing the original Duke Nukem 3D. Level 9, Overlord. Besides the grand finale, there's not much more I feel obligated to point out here. It's just more the same at this point, however it's a good kinda same. This game sure has had a couple of stinkers, but this one I would classify as good, which is fitting for the final stage. The stuff that makes this game fun is all represented here, without those reused beta gimmicks which weren't awful, but often responsible for slowing down the game's pace. The Overlord stage is very fast-paced, with a consistent stream of solid fights, all set to the adrenaline-pumping track of Fusion Station's robo-creeping. Though it does sound quite different. I think it's been sped up quite a bit, which was probably intentional to keep the heat and spirit of being the final stage. It also happens to be the first stage you'll ever see, as its demo plays after the initial grab bag title screen. It's been a long time coming up to this moment, a whole 2.5 hours, so now it's time to take down that Overlord. In classic Cyber Demon fashion, shoot at it until it dies. Duke cracked his knuckles and smirked. This is the same message that shows when you defeat the Overlord in the original game. Duke takes off on his ship while passing by this Brazilian spaceship. I see what you did there. You know, game over isn't usually what reads when you beat a game, but it does in this one. Past this screen, the game just resets. So here are my closing thoughts. Regardless of whether you feel Duke Nukem 3D on the Mega Drive is a good or bad game, you can't deny that the technical work put into this is worthy of respect. I mean, it runs on 1988 hardware for goodness sake, this is programming wizardry. Beyond that, I still feel it's a game worth looking into with a little patience. It does take time to get used to, and the difficulty curve is by all means a convincing persuader. However, beyond that is a first-person shooter with occasionally great level design. A little balancing, better placement of enemies, and warnings for hazards like sentry drones, and those closing walls, is what this game needed to be more fondly remembered. Unfortunately, its glaring flaws seem to overshadow what's good about this thing. I'm just lucky to have been so ignorant as a teenager and forced myself to sit through the entire game. If it weren't for that, I'd probably be in the same spot most other people have settled with. Clearly, the developers respected the source material and gave a noble attempt in creating their own interpretation of Duke Nukem 3D. Today, if you've grown even a little more respect for this infamous game, then my work here is done, because after all, while the game may be a mess, it still achieved greatness in one way or another. So thanks everyone for watching, and I hope to catch you FrameRaters in the next video.